so excited and wanted to do this for so long. So thank you so much for joining me today, because this is going to be super fascinating. For those who don't know, Ben Taylor is a self-aware narcissist who's been working on himself and has a platform of helping people understand what narcissism is, why we get trapped in these relationships, how to protect ourselves better, everything related to all of this. And so I'm super excited to have him here. I'm still hoping, are you able to see the invitation, Ben?
I see it on TikTok. I think I'm on TikTok
Okay.
now.
Okay. Okay. All right. So he'll be on in a minute on Instagram. So, hey, TikTok. Yeah. So good to see you guys on TikTok. Thank you so much for joining me. And for you that are just coming on live, this is I'm Dr. McAvoy, and I'm being joined by Ben Taylor, Raw Motivations, who's a self-aware narcissist, and we're still struggling to gain access through Instagram. So I'm working. Once we get him on both platforms, we're going to be able to start talking about narcissism, why narcissists do the way that they do, how we misunderstand their motives. I think that's one of the areas that I find myself the most vulnerable, is I assume that the motives that they have are the same as mine, which then ends up getting me trapped, caught, hurt. I don't know about if that's the same thing for you all, but it's such a challenging process when this happens. So we're right now still, you know how it works with technical stuff. So we're still trying to go live on Instagram with him as well. So, and thank you. Yeah, I know you guys have been changing up my wig, so this is a new one. I really like the blonde short. My moderators are so careful for me. Thank you so much. I don't like comments about my looks, but I do know that I constantly throwing you guys with new looks. So thank you for thank you for the observation. Okay. So I will be looking here. Okay, I'm accepting. Let's see. We're almost there, guys. We're almost there. Sorry for this slow period here. And there we go. Okay. We're on both platforms live. So thank you so much for joining. So Ben, thank you so much for being here today. Why don't you introduce yourself to my audience, and then I can tell a little bit about myself to your audience.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So my name is Ben Taylor. I run the company Raw Motivations, and so I'm on here as a self-aware narcissist to try to promote awareness, growth, healing, and change. And so we're super excited to be able to be here, to be able to help other people understand a little bit of what's going on as far as like narcissism, narcissistic abuse, and some of my journey, some of the information that happens, and just people trying to be able to have clarity, coming from the confusion of everything that's going on. How we are echoing.
I know, it's me. I have two going on here. Sorry, guys. I'm trying to adjust there. I should address it. I think I fixed it. Why don't you say something, Ben? Let's see if we fixed it.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Let me see. I might be able to plug in a different.
Because how's the echoing doing on my side, guys? Are you hearing echo on my side? Oh yeah, my side says it's fixed. It's
Okay,
done.
yeah, I think we're fixed. I plugged it into a different phone. I muted the other, so I think we're
okay. Good. All right. Yeah, thank you, Ben, for that. I appreciate your platform, and I appreciate the efforts that you're making to make people more self-aware, and in the process, in a way, you're telling on yourself, which is that, and it's intriguing, because it means you have to sort of get through a lot of the things that would make most of us vulnerable, and I appreciate you putting yourself out there like that for exposure like that. So for those on Ben's platform who don't know me, I'm Dr. McAvoy. I'm a licensed psychologist with over 20 years of clinical experience. These days, I primarily do write and education about narcissistic abuse, but also anything related to mental health, healthier relationships, healthier communications, and certainly how to reduce our risk to abuse and predatory people. So that's why when Ben suggested this, I really jumped at the idea, because I love the ability for us to talk about these things. Because one of the things that I've noticed, Ben, and I'd love to hear you say more about this, is how many times have you noticed people make the assumption that how you see the world is how others see the world, and they attribute their motives to you, or maybe you even do the same back. Maybe you attribute your motives to us. So talk about the disjointedness, the differences between those two worldviews.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm trying to think of like the best way to kind of like sum some of that up. But like I think like an idea is like from the narcissist perspective, like a lot of times we view like other people as thinking and processing stuff like the same way that we think. So like an easy example is, you know, if I'm being dishonest, then I think everybody else is going to be dishonest. Like there's normally like a an idea that like my worldview is the exact same thing that is going on the other side, which makes it like really hard to be able to process stuff or get anywhere, because there's always this kind of like double thinking of, you know, how you're interacting is probably, you know, malicious towards me, or how you're interacting is probably something that's unsafe towards me, so as a result I'm not going to open up, or I'm not going to share, I'm not going to be honest or anything like that.
Do you also see the same thing with when somebody is trying to change you or sticking around or putting up with things that maybe you would think, why would you do that? I would never put up with that. And then how do you feel when you see that? Do you know what I'm talking about?
As
Because
far as
so
like
many,
working with people now, like seeing like them put up with stuff longer than what they
yeah,
should and things like that.
yeah,
Yeah, I think
yeah.
there's an aspect of that. I mean, it's frustrating to some degree. I think there's also a point that I've come to acknowledge and know that, hey, that's going to be part of, you know, someone's journey along the way. But there's definitely been aspects of like, why are you still putting up with this? And I think because a lot of times people are viewing and thinking that if they stick it out long enough, or they put up with something, that maybe the person will change, maybe something will happen. But I'm like, no, like we've seen, you know, patterns. We've seen like this behavior happen over and over again, and nothing's actually changing. Nothing's actually, you know, having people understand like, hey, this isn't working out.
Because one of the things I've noticed is that when victims, like even like with hoovering, when victims tolerate the abusive behavior and even take the person back, I know what goes through my mind. My mind, what I think is, oh, they've missed me. They've become
Hmm.
a different person, and they try. This is so important to them. They're going to try. But what I suspect and what I've heard is that actually the person who's the more toxic person tends to think, no, if they're willing to put up with what happened before, then they're willing to put up with anything. Then they don't deserve anything good from me, or it's okay, whatever. I don't know. Can you say more about that part of it?
Yeah, as far as I think a lot of times people mistake like the idea that hoovering means care. You know, a lot of times people think like, oh, like they didn't hoover me, they didn't come back in my life, so they must not have cared. And it's essential for people to understand like they didn't actually care to start off with. And the aspect that they didn't come back in your life doesn't show care or not care. People normally say like, you know, oh, like they're hoovered me, so like they must care about me. When in reality, like there's a big aspect of they probably lost their power and their control over the mass that they were putting up, and control over another person, which is typically why they try to hoover. It's typically why they try to come back in.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I know that there's a severe mismatch, which is why we end up in such very different places, and why so many of us are very vulnerable, because we see it as the relationship is primary, and we're very concerned about trying to keep the relationship going, which I
Mm-hmm.
think then people who have more of a narcissistic or sociopathic view of the world see as more predatory or competitive, and they're trying to protect themselves more at a survival level, and so they're viewing it from survival, whereas the partner's viewing it from a relationship, and they're not even in the same plane. I mean, that's
Mm-hmm.
not even the same language, essentially, which then adds to the confusion about how for victims to make a good, best decision, because we're coming at it from a wrong angle. We're going to misunderstand what we're seeing in the behavior.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So what do you advise people do then? How do you
Which
help
part?
them, yeah, well, break through this confusion,
Right.
because the misunderstanding of things.
Someone said on Instagram that they couldn't hear me. That's weird.
Okay.
It's
Yeah,
hard to
he
hear
said
me.
it's hard to hear Ben, is what I'm seeing. Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm afraid if this, then I think when you talk, it comes through my Instagram one.
Ah, Instagram, how am I doing?
I don't know. Here, say something real quick so I can see.
Okay, so on my side, can you,
Okay, I didn't hear you
Ben's
on that
mic's
side, so
low. How is my
maybe that'll
mic
work.
doing?
Okay, let me plug
Okay.
into a different one.
Yeah, she's saying that's better now. And on TikTok, it's doing just fine.
There we go.
There
Okay.
you go. Oh, my audio comes and goes. Weird. Okay. All
All right.
right. We got a good audience here on Instagram. I have never had this many people. I love seeing you all. I'm always here on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 1 p.m. I don't know when you go live,
Sorry,
Ben, but
I'm having an issue with my side. Give me one second
okay.
here.
Yeah, it's starting to say yours is, yeah. So yeah, while you're working on that, I'll continue talking. And I also want to, I'm going to take questions too, guys. So if you have a question for Ben or me, please put a thumbs up in front of the comments, and that way I know that you're talking to both of us or one of us. And then we can talk to your questions. So we don't want to just focus on interviewing about narcissism, although I really appreciate hearing Ben's viewpoint because of it's so different than my viewpoint, so different than most of us. And we had so many questions. For me, one of the big questions is, how do they see the world? Who am I to this person? What's their motivation in the relationship? Those are some of the things that I really have wanted, that I've been curious about. But maybe you're curious about different things. So what types of things are you all curious about that you would like to know from Ben's perspective? So make sure you put a thumbs up in front of your comments, and I'd be happy to take those questions. I know somebody.
I think I'm back. Hopefully everybody can hear me now.
Okay.
I'm testing it out, so I had to change a couple things around. I think we're good.
Yeah. So let us know how the sound's sounding. Yeah. Yeah. And Brittany just took a quiz. She's asked, who's people struggling with? Who's the narcissist in their life on TikTok? And right now, 77% that the narcissist said that is their partner. They're struggling with a partner is the difficulty. Okay. Yeah. So. Yeah, everybody says it sounds better. Everything sounds better, so we did it. So thank you, guys.
Perfect. Sorry. It's been a while since we've connected multiple platforms and got them all running, so it's all good.
We're doing awesome. 3 cameras at the same time, guys. Can you imagine it? 3 cameras. It's very complicated, yeah.
Are you recording on the Zoom? I want to make sure you can.
I forgot to. No, I forgot.
Cool. All right, well, you can start.
Well,
it's all good. I tried to do it on my end, and it wouldn't let me because it's your Zoom, so I just want to at least let you know in case you wanted that going. So, anyway.
Yeah, I realize I'm this far in, and I forgot, but I can start it now. But I do know that we have it on Instagram. We can pull it off Instagram. So
sounds good.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to do is pull it off. So are there levels of... Yeah, okay, so there's a lot of great questions coming in, Ben. I don't know if you see them. One wants to know, what's your attachment style? Are you more secure now that you're working on it? Another one wants to know, are there levels of narcissism? Do some people have at least a little empathy and feel a little bit of love? I think those are great questions. So
those are super good questions.
Yeah.
So attachment style, what I would go with right now is I've always had more of an avoidant attachment or an anxious avoidant attachment. Sometimes it's kind of oscillate a little bit. I would say I'm more secure in my attachment style, but it's nowhere near all the way up in the secure quadrant by any means. I think the last time I took it, I was still, hanging around the avoidant section, but not as far down, as far deep into that quadrant as what it is. But it definitely is a challenge. There definitely is a lot of things that go into trying to build that secure attachment. That's hard. That's hard because a huge aspect of being secure is being secure of who I am, to actually show that to other people, whether that's on social media. That's one thing. Sometimes people are oh, you get supply for this. Social media is honestly a pretty crappy supply, to be honest, because when it comes down to it, that actual connection, getting to a secure, connection relationship is actually being vulnerable with the people closest to you, being vulnerable and actually, not just vulnerable of, past events, because a lot of times narcissists will use that as fake vulnerability, but vulnerability of this is how I'm feeling, this is how I'm processing, this stuff that's going on. That stuff is super scary, and you have to grow in that secure attachment to even be able to convey any of that.
Yeah, absolutely. It is really, really, really tough. So based on that, because being scared to show up has been hard. That's where you've been, is being scared to show up. Do you find then it's hard to feel love? What's your definition of love? I know where you are probably today, but I'm asking the Ben that I would have met a few years ago. What would have been that Ben's definition of love?
Yeah, so I think a huge aspect of I didn't really have a good solid definition of love, and for me, a lot of the aspect of love back then had to do all about myself and what I was getting out of a relationship. A lot of it ended up being the perspective that I had didn't really let me engage in any aspect that I would view as any type of true love, but momentary highs, momentary pieces of happiness or connection or things like that, but not really anything true and long lasting, because my ego, my entitlement, I was standing in the way of actual true engagement and true love. I also think a big aspect of growing up, the version of love that I experienced and that I also brought into relationships, had to do with a semblance of control. I thought love was actually like being controlling of another person on at least some level, of like what they're doing, who they're hanging out with, where they're going. Like there was an aspect of that that I felt was that I attributed to being love, because part of that was some of my upbringing of like what I grew up with and how I interacted with my parents and my family. Like there was a huge aspect that was controlling of, oh, well, we love you because you can't do this, or we love you because of this. And a lot of times that's what I brought into other relationships. And then as a result, it'd get to the place where that relationship would fall apart. They'd go their own way. And then I'd be like, oh, well, it wasn't my fault because I was showing love. I was showing love how I thought it was, that control, so, it must be something else, and play the victim off in that aspect.
Here's another thing that I've noticed, and I'd love to have you speak to that too, is because I share this a lot with people, is that when someone who's more narcissistic, and we're all on a continuum, so I want to be very careful about, there's no one who doesn't have any narcissism. And then, yes, there are people who are moderate level and high level, and where Ben is on that spectrum, I don't know, but he's above the line, above what we would say diagnosable. But one of the things I noticed with people who have more pathological narcissistic traits is that when they meet someone, they're not actually building a relationship on a real idea of this is a different person and they have their own thoughts and dreams. They're autonomous. They're an individual. And I'm going to respect that person. And we're going to have this incredible, compromising, mutual, reciprocal relationship. Instead, it seems to be more of a fantasy based, almost like it makes the partner a caricature of who they actually are. Like somehow it's almost like wish fulfillment. So do you see that? Because what happens then is that it's very rapidly people, because we're real and we're not perfect, we're going to fail to live up to that expectation. And that, I think, then starts the disillusionment stage. So can you speak about that, what that process looks like?
Yeah, I think for me, the main aspect I can speak to it is like going from relationship to relationship and, going from affair to affair. It's like the idea that the grass is always greener on the other side, and like this person is going to fix me. This person is going to save me. This person is going to make me, I think a lot of times the thought process was even like this person is going to make me, feel or seem more human, more empathetic, more nice, things like that. And almost like being able to fix. But then there is an aspect of like searching for ideal love or ideal connection of like, maybe this is the one. Maybe this is the person that actually I connect with that actually is the right person for me. And then getting into it and realizing like, oh wait, like this doesn't work, or oh wait, like they don't like this kind of interaction. They don't like this type of control when like this is what I'm putting out there. And then like as it falls out and as it like dissipates, it ends up being something that then it's me looking at it and being like, well, I'm the victim. Like everybody leaves me. Like that was a conscious thought I knew even before becoming aware, but that was the thought of like everybody always leaves me. Like I'm always there for people. I'm always consistent. I'm always showing up, but everybody walks away.
Wow, that's fascinating. It's interesting how the narrative is there's the perfect person, then the person isn't perfect, and they start to be themselves, and then that's then their narrative shifts. Where then you've been victimized by their failure to show up.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Like I'm victimized because they didn't show up when I'm the one that's showing up, and even if my showing up is abusive in nature, like it's still their fault because they walked away.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how would you see it play out on the partner's side? Did you notice that? Did you notice their reaction to this process, or was that something you were oblivious to?
Can you kind of
I know it's a hard question. Yeah. Like for example, they're responding you too, and they're having an experience with you. What is it falls apart, and they're upset and feeling hurt and feeling rejected, and now they're feeling blamed by the fact that they're feeling the rejection is happening, and they're feeling blamed. Did you notice any of that? Notice any of their reaction? And what did you think of like they were just being sensitive, or it was stupid? Or what did you think?
Yeah, I think there's an aspect of that I didn't notice that was kind of like minimized and kind of pushed down. And there was an aspect of that also kind of like got swept under the rug of like that same like victim aspect, of, they're reacting that way. Or I guess the other way that I'll be able to describe it is sometimes then you can twist that to reflect back on the shame that I feel already. Like, oh, well, they're doing that because, maybe I messed up on something, so I have to keep that mask up as another way to be able to avoid that shame. because there's a lot of times where, you know, people's emotions, people's ideas, they'll trigger those different aspects of shame, and then it's like, how do I get away from that as quick as possible? You know, typically it's
Right.
distorting their reality, typically it's doing something along those lines, but how do I get away from that? And then if I can't get away from that, then that's where a lot of times like the rage and the blame and everything comes out.
Wow, that's so fascinating. It's so fascinating. It's so different on the other side. I'm sure now that you have a sense of that now that you've been
Right.
engaged with people. So somebody else asked a while ago, and I don't want to miss it because it was a great question, about children and narcissists. And I know that you're a dad,
Mm-hmm.
and I've met your daughter, and
Mm-hmm.
I know that, you know, what a beautiful family the three of you make. Can you speak about how your relationship with your daughter has changed as you've been healing? What it was
Yeah.
like before, where it is today?
So I mean, what I would say what it was like before was non-existent. I mean, there was a huge aspect of throughout the pregnancy and throughout like the initial like year or so of, you know, Sophia's life. Like I wasn't engaged. I was a workaholic and a cheater, and so like every effort and focus was put on everything else but them and but like her development and stuff like that. And I think a lot of times people struggle with the idea of parenting with a narcissist because they want to be able to keep them connected to the other partner, you know, be able to keep them connected to the narcissistic dad or the narcissistic mom, when in reality it comes down to it is like they actually don't care. You know, kids for the narcissist are typically either a liability or an inconvenience, and that's really all that is kind of like processing on like a typical basis. And when you couple that with, you know, lack of care and lack of empathy, then is pretty much like nothing there as far as like heartstrings pulled or anything like that to have an active, healthy, engaging relationship. So I was disconnected. Like there wasn't really anything there. Now on the healing journey, it's tapping into more the idea of cognitive empathy, you know, starting to understand more about it, having more knowledge about how that works, and also having more understanding about parenting, you know, about authoritative parenting, but also like gentle parenting of like helping understand how to be able to help them process their emotions and things like that. That's not innate, you know, that's not something that, you know, all of a sudden I'm healed and like I magically like connect with that. I think the easiest illustration that I've said a couple of times to people is like we had a time where Sophia was trying to get into one of the rooms and she couldn't turn the doorknob. This is back when she was like 2 or something like that. And she got really upset, and being able to express her emotions, all she did is she just reared back and like hit her head in the door. Like this door isn't budging. And, you know, as soon as she did that, she started crying. And, you know, my first thought is like, well, what'd you expect? You know, it wasn't like oh, I'm sorry that you're crying, you know, and bad, like it's a bad thing that you're crying. And like, you know, Kayla's like, you know, hey, like she needs comfort because she's upset, she doesn't understand, you know, that kind of thing. That kind of wiring isn't innate.
Yeah.
And so it's been helpful to see, you know, Kayla's influence, and she's been amazing in parenting and trying to help with all that, and trying a lot of times to even exemplify you know, what she's doing, you know, at the same time in my life of like, hey, this isn't natural and this isn't normal, but this is how I'm going to try to show up because I know my daughter needs that.
Right, exactly. Exactly. That's fascinating. And one of the things that I'm becoming increasingly aware of with the new research coming out is that this is a biosocial problem, that there's hard wiring. So one of the things that's missing in certain people's brains, and narcissists are not the only ones who have this component that's not there. Psychopaths as well as autistic, and I don't know, there may be other groups as well, struggle with empathy. Empathy is a problem. Now, I'm autistic. I also, believe it or not, struggle with empathy. I don't know if you're surprised to hear that, but it is possible to grow there's more than one type of empathy, and it's possible to grow some types. Some types may always be missing for some of us, but that doesn't mean that we can't become more, as Ben was saying, cognitively empathic. So how have you been growing your cognitive empathy? And I'd love to throw out some suggestions on how I've been growing mine as well.
I think, well, I'd take a little sidestep first when it talks to empathy, because the more and more I've been engaging with different levels of empathy and also talking about it, I think there's, and you might correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's an actual like stigma of like narcissist equals no empathy. And I think that's kind of like the thought out there of like, oh, this person doesn't have empathy, they're a narcissist, you know. And you just kind of talked about how there's like different people that struggle with it. But I also think there's an aspect, there's a decent amount of narcissists out there that have empathy. But the thing is, people don't understand is like that empathy, like it doesn't actually come to fruition of them showing care and them showing changed behavior. What happens is if they show empathy, it actually means that they have to sacrifice their ego. And
Yeah. can you pause on that for a second? Because one of the things that's been showing on neuroimaging is the part of the brain that feels distress for guilt and angst of confusion. That part is sort of under functioning in a narcissistic brain. The part that is excessively active is the part of self-focus, mentation about oneself. So if you kind of put those two things together, where if you're struggling to have a good sense of what it feels like to be in someone else's body, that's emotional empathy. So when they resonate pain, you resonate pain with them. It's almost like a tuning fork. When there's a real powerful sound and vibrations in the room, a tuning fork will start to hum at the same frequency. That's emotional empathy. Cognitive empathy is the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes and imagine life from that perspective. So imagine for a moment that you're not terribly sensitive, you're not resonating well with the emotional context of other people. In fact, on psychopaths, they found when they look at images of a photo, they have a hard time even identifying the feeling on a person's face unless it's a very large emotion. Then they can, like a person is extremely overtly angry, they can say, oh, that's anger. But if it's like irritation, they're going to not notice that that's irritation and not register it as irritation. So you kind of put that as a problem and you're excessively focused on yourself. You can see then how that then makes it so you could be low on one and it really focused on how the world's turning out and the fairness of it. And you can see how you can kind of twist everything. So you may be picking up on other people's emotions, but it may not lead to the same conclusion those around you would want, which is, oh, he's going to care about my skin knee. You may just say, no, you got in my way. Your skin, I see you're upset and it's bothering me. It's getting in the way of today.
It's inconvenient. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
I mean,
so it's not that he's not registering it. Yeah, exactly. It's just not doing the same thing maybe it would do for someone else. You're right. I do think, as a psychologist, I get really edgy when we say there's all or nothing. There's no such thing as all or nothing in the world of psychology. It's all on a continuum of levels. Is it low, medium, or high? And yeah, there are some people who are narcissistic who have some empathy and maybe even a decent amount of empathy, but is it being used proactively in a way that's helpful? Right. That may not be. That's maybe the issue, is may not be. But there's more than one type of empathy too. Like I was saying, cognitive empathy is the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes. Now, in certain people, that could become dangerous. They could put themselves in someone else's shoes and then use that information in order to strategically get ahead and become competitive, So again, it's this information is neutral, is what we do with the information and how our worldview with it, what we, shapes what we do with that information. All of that kind of plays a role in this.
Right. Yeah, I think a big aspect of empathy that when narcissists have empathy but they're unwilling to show it, it goes back to the shame, the guilt, the avoidance of that. But also, I think I described it in a video that's coming out in a week or so about narcissists having empathy, actually, that I just recorded today, actually, was going on the idea of I can give empathy but at the price of my ego. And that's the hardest thing, because the easiest illustration that I've come up with is if something happens in my life with my wife and I upset her and I know I'm the cause, I know I'm the person that messed up, I'm the problem, and she goes over to the couch and she sits down and she starts crying and bawling, and I know that there's a huge part of what she's doing is because of me. In that moment, I can choose to engage with empathy of let me go over, let me apologize, let me give her a hug, let me comfort her. But if I do that, it does two things. First off, if I do that, it shows that, hey, I'm validating her emotions, and then I'm also validating the validity of her emotions that ultimately come back to the reason why she's crying is because of me, and that hits the ego, that hits the shame, and that's something where it seems, in the mind, it seems easier to stand here and let another person across the room cry than it is to actually walk over there and sacrifice ego in the process.
Yeah, really well said. I love that. That's such a good point. And on top of it, it's you have an agenda for the day, and your agenda for the day is now being affected. So you're being derailed on. I've kind of seen this whole. There's just so many angles that are happening at the same time, and it costs. What I'm hearing is it costs you something, and that cost feels uncomfortable. So you err in the direction of self-protection over err in the direction of preserving the relationship. Which,
of this is inconveniencing me because I have stuff to do, or at the end of the day, me going over there for 5 minutes isn't going to fix it. So what's the point?
And I like that fix it, which we all know that there really isn't fixing things. It's more of connecting and growing, nurturing. You know, you don't fix a feeling, you support a feeling. But that's really great that you say that. I love that. Can't fix the feeling, so why bother? Yeah, no, that's really intriguing.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it for like 2 minutes. It should be over with. It should be done with, right?
Yeah, and often here's the other paradox, and I know it's one thing people don't understand. I certainly know because all the years in therapy myself, but also seeing all the years of people in therapy, is that sometimes when we're in the greatest pain, we have the biggest insights and we become profoundly different. It isn't the resolving of pain, it's what we do with it that takes us into new places, and that's super exciting. But yet when we avoid it, then we avoid those growing moments and stretching moments.
Very true. And that's hard for a lot of like survivors that don't want to actually engage with the pain, not to sit in it, but actually like process it and work through it. Because a lot of times it's like, let me run away from it, let me jump into another relationship, let me hide it, let me push it down. But like the dealing with it part, I think, is very essential for people to heal, grow, and change.
Yeah, I'm going to pause again and introduce both of us for those who are joining right now. And also, for many of you have been asking what we're going to do with this live. Will it be posted? Yes. So let me introduce myself. I'm Dr. Carrie McAvoy. I'm a licensed psychologist with over 20 years of counseling experience. I'm also a narcissistic abuse survivor myself, post being a psychologist. So it happened, way down the road. It can happen to anybody at any time. And then this is Ben Taylor. He's Raw Motivations. He is a self-aware narcissist who's been on a journey of healing and has been really trying to help people understand the mind of a narcissist so that we can all help understand what's happening on their end, but also help protect ourselves better so that we're wiser and make better choices in these relationships. So one of the questions that comes up a lot, is intentionality. Do they know they're doing this? And I know from a victim side why we ask this. I get this because I spent a long time on it too, pursued a lot of therapy for my partner because I kept hoping things could get better. I mean, obviously, let me outline what the reasons are, and then I want to hear what your side of it is because I really want to hear what's going on that side. But on the victim side is we really believe in the possibility of the goodness of people. And we're hoping that we can help preserve, and that's why we got into the relationship, is because we believe that everybody is in the process of becoming better and more, and we want to help this person. So when we hear there's a woundedness or something wrong, our first inclination is let's jump in and make this better. So that's motivation number one. Number two, which is more of a self-preservation reason, is that we've invested a lot. And not only do we love this individual, but we've also built a life with them. So to accept the fact this isn't going to change, and that maybe there's even bad intention here, or at least negligent attention, or like the lack of caring, suggests then that we have to sort of tear our whole life apart. And that's really hard and scary. And then the other thing is because the person who's doing this, and here's the thing that people who have not experienced a narcissistic abuse really don't understand, there's a duality of realities. The person that we're living with is both good and hurtful at the same time, good and evil even sometimes. And so we live in this path of who am I really with at the same time? Who is this person? And so if we could figure out the intentionality, then we would know why they're in the relationship, and it would help break the impasse that we're at. And that's called cognitive dissonance. So what's happening on your side?
Yeah, no, as part of it, I was trying to wrap my mind around like the reasons you were saying, because I was like trying to like connect with some of those. So I think really we're talking about the intention, and then like is the main question the idea of like do they know that they're hurting, or like is it intentional that they're hurting? I guess that's really what we're going after, right?
Both. I mean, okay. I think knowing is one level, but knowing and then purposefully doing it, that's intentionality. So I think that first level, we want to know, do you know? Are you aware? Mm-hmm. The second level is, and do you need to be doing this?
Okay. I'm going to answer the second one first then. Okay. So the easiest way that I can explain it is by using an illustration. Okay. And so the illustration is you and I are standing here, and you're actually standing behind me. Okay. And where we're standing is actually on a road. And as I look down the road, I see a car that's coming at us. Now, car is going probably like 50, 60 miles an hour coming at us. You can't see them because you're behind me. But as that car gets closer and closer, I can make out the bumper on it that actually has written on it guilt and shame. And as that car gets closer and closer, I realize that that is going to impact me and ultimately reveal accountability and responsibility and show aspects of my life because of guilt and shame that I don't want to deal with. So as a result, as it gets closer, without telling you that there's a car coming, I jump out of the way and that car runs over you. So there's an aspect that a lot of times the avoidance of shame is so powerful that it doesn't matter who it impacts and it doesn't matter who hurts from it. Because at the end of the day, if you got hurt by that car running over you, in the narcissist mind, it doesn't matter. It just matters that I didn't get impacted with it. Because that goes back to the ego, the entitlement. If I don't get impacted with it, then that's great. That's fine. As long as I'm the one that's like safe from getting impacted by guilt and shame, then who cares if it hurts someone else?
Well, let's stop on that for a second, because I know you have a whole lot more to say about it. But so what? You get ashamed. So what? We all survive shame. It's, yes, I know from a psychological standpoint, it is the most negative emotional experience, most powerful, and the most dreaded. Well, maybe rejection, abandonment, we don't like that either. That's really, really, really bad as well. But, and maybe that's tied in. Help me understand. So what? So you find out that you've been bad. You've been, you've done something really hurtful. In fact, you know that you have. So it's not like you're not aware you shouldn't have done this. You know you shouldn't have done this.
Right.
Why not take it? Why not face and experience it and face it?
And I think part of it is my response to how to process guilt that automatically leads to shame. So like if I do something that's bad, instead of being able to assess that and be like, okay, that was bad, let me not do that, let me change my behavior. Instead, that thing that I look at that says, hey, I did something bad, flips really quick that says I am bad. And as a result, that's not an image that I want to be able to keep or have, because I've already been putting it out there to hide my own insecurity or to hide my own like aspect of shame. I've already been putting it out there that I am a good person, or I am, a faithful husband or a loving father or something like that. And then when it's the temptation or the idea of that popping up, of actually being revealed, is like so, I don't know, scary is not the right word, but like is so impossible to try to feel like it's possible to deal with, because like it's like the idea, like it, to me it feels like more like the aspect of like physical unaliveness, getting to that place, because like it's that, it produces like that much like frustration, anxiety, like whatever exactly it is, but it's like there's an angst about like I can't actually have that happen to my life, because if it does, then that's acknowledging somebody that I don't want to be and that I don't think I am, and that I'm not projecting out there that I am.
That's what I thought. I suspected it felt like it's an annihilating experience.
Yes, that's a good word.
You cease to be, and that's so intolerable that you will make the most horrific decisions. In fact, someone pointed out your logic is illogical, because it's shameful to let somebody else be shamed. So, but I know you're not even thinking about that in the moment, and all you're thinking is, I will cease to exist if this occurs. I must exist. And then you do whatever you have to do to survive.
Which I like how you said that. One, I like the annihilation, because that's literally like a great way to do it. But like that is what's being protected, is the mask, because if that shame is actually brought out, then that's what ceases to exist. Like if I actually acknowledge the guilt and the shame, take the accountability and the responsibility of like what just happened, then my mask ceases to exist, and that's my protective barrier that I got to be able to stay behind.
Yeah, and the saddest thing of all then? The saddest thing of all is you being your most raw, vulnerable, broken selves. And I know Ben and I know each other. We have a personal relationship. So I've seen other sides of Ben that off platform. One of the things I've recognized is that when that occurs, that is when you are the most lovable. That's true for all of us. Is that it is, when we even see it in research. For example, you make an error online or on a live or whatever, you become more likable because of the error. It's when you present a perfect image that people struggle to connect, because none of us are perfect, and we know that, and we all struggle with our sense of shame. So isn't that sad that we're missing out on the greatest opportunity to connect around vulnerability by avoiding the vulnerability? Oh, it breaks my heart. Yeah. Breaks my heart. So speak on the other part of the intentionality. So, because now you've got a partner you see who's been struck by the car that you've jumped out of the way of. What happens then?
The part of that is where the empathy doesn't kick in, of like, well, that sucks, you have a broken leg, because like that just happened, like that empathy piece isn't there. There's an aspect that like you see the stuff that happens after the fact, but you're not predicting it to happen in the to start off with. And so like when that car is coming at me, I'm not thinking if I move, that's going to hurt you. I'm just thinking I just have to move. There's not really the foresight or the thought process like farther down the road of like, how is this action going to affect other people? How is this action going to affect my wife, my job, my kid, like anything like that? How is it actually going to affect? Because in the moment, it doesn't have anything to do with them. It's all about me. It's all about the ego. It's all about what I'm looking at. It's not about like them. And so like after the fact that it happens, then it typically has to be explained away. And so a lot of times I'll describe in like sometimes like a chart that I'll do of like guilt and shame that gets activated, and then the next step to try to be able to get away from it is blame. And so, well, like yeah, like if you'd been looking over my shoulder, you would have seen the car and you would have moved. So it's like your fault that you didn't move. And then it goes to the next stage of like you either two things, either you not taking that blame and you're like, no, like it's not my fault, you were in my way, or the you taking the blame and it not getting fixed, like the problem's still not fixed in that moment. So then like the rage comes out of like, okay, well then I'm just gonna go off because I have to be able to distract from the idea that I'm the one that actually moved out of the way and caused the damage. But it's not something I want to be able to own up to or have that accountability that, hey, it was my fault.
Yeah, exactly. And isn't it interesting, again, what happens is the preservation of self causes all this changing of the narrative, the changing of the story in order to preserve that it's still, you're okay. I mean, that's what the continuing thread through the whole thing that is, I can't face being undone, exposed. And even on the back end, I can't face being undone and exposed. So there's all this work that's going on in preservation of ego, self, and as you call it, the mask, which is what you think that you're showing to the world, which, it's fascinating. It's really fascinating. So one of the other questions that have been coming in, I've seen, is how are you and your wife been navigating the fact that you're doing this together, that there's been trauma in your relationship, that you're trying to both heal. In fact, I know you have a podcast together. In fact, I'd love to have you do a shout out about that. Yeah. But sort of like, where are you guys now, and how are you doing that? And here's the piece that I want to be really careful about, because just because this is working in yours, it does not usually work. So, how do you know when you've got somebody who's, as Gregory Lester says, you're in the first group is you get confronted, you get worse, and then you get better. Kayla got lucky, you're in that first group. Most of us are in a relationship with someone, we confront them, they get worse, or we confront them and they get dangerous. So talk to that about that part.
Yeah, I think a big part of people are wondering, because sometimes people see my platform or Lee's and they get hope of like, well, they changed, or they'll attribute to be like they changed for their wives, which is not the case for both of us. And people need to hear that loud and clear. And I try to be really clear whenever I talk about my platform, awareness, growth, healing, and change, that I didn't say hope. Because if the person that you're with is not exemplifying honesty, vulnerability, and consistent change, then you need to walk away. Because so many people will latch on to hope, potential, like they'll get onto the cognitive dissonance and they'll stay stuck for such a long period of time in a trauma bond, because like they're holding on to like a maybe and a possibility for it to happen, instead of looking at the reality of what's going on in the moment of honesty, vulnerability, consistent change. It's not there, then I'm out. So like if you don't see that in your relationship, then be very careful, and you probably need to be planning an exit strategy. Don't look at my relationship for hope, because like I think it's also it's key for people to know and understand, because sometimes people get my story messed up. I have it a couple places, but they get my story messed up of what actually happened. And I think it's huge for people to understand that like I didn't change for my wife, and she didn't force me to change. She didn't force me into therapy. Like there wasn't something that she did that made me change. And I think sometimes people think like, oh, well, your wife left you, that's why you changed, or that's why you got into therapy. My wife left me when I was like 8 months into therapy. Like it wasn't like she left and I'm like, oh, something's wrong, let me go to therapy. I was already on a journey and a process, but I didn't have the change behavior. There wasn't actually a complete like life change or heart change of what I was doing. So as a result, I had 6 months of EMDR, and it was like 2-3 months of like regular therapy, and she left. She left for a good like quarter of a year, and it wasn't until the fact that she ended up coming back that she even had in her mindset of like, hey, I need to go back anyways because I need to get stuff, so I'll go back and I'll give it a month, I'll give it a trial period and see like how it actually pans out, like the actions, the attitudes, what's actually going to happen. And in her own words, and she says this I think on the podcast as well, like whenever she came back, the reason why she stayed at that point was changed behavior. Like she was like, I came back and you treated me completely different. Like the actions and the attributes of what you were doing was night and day difference compared to when I first left. And and she said initially, like, so I'll take it but for a month, then we'll take it for the next month. We'll take it for the next month. Like we'll just kind of keep going to see. And I asked her on the podcast, I was like, is it still month to month? And she was like, no, like sometimes, but no, And it's like the idea and the difference now is like she is more secure in who she is, and she's more secure with years of therapy that she's been going through to be able to help her know, like, hey, if he does do something, if he reverts, to more narcissistic ways, if he goes out and cheats, stuff like that, like it doesn't affect her worth because she knows who she is, and she also knows, okay, I'm packing up the bags and I'm leaving. Like literally, like that matter of factly, like she knows that's there. And I know that's part of the boundary. I know that's one of like several boundaries that she has. But it's also something that she's confident in of like, this is who I am. And because of all that, I mean, she's been in therapy like twice as long as I have. So I think like 3-4 years kind of a thing. And we talk about some of that and we dive into that even because people ask us, we kind of dive into one of the episodes about, is my wife still trauma bonded to me? Like all that kind of stuff on our podcast. So I'll give that shout out real quick. So yeah, it's Trauma, Drama, and Life. It's on Apple Podcasts. I looked it up today because I was curious. I looked it up on Chartable and we have 4 episodes out. That's it. 4 episodes out. And in the U.S., under relationships, it's ranked number 87 in the U.S. So
That's awesome.
Can't believe it. So it's really cool. So I really do appreciate everybody's like support in that. It's been huge, and we keep taking other questions, comments on Instagram and through the email of people that want to hear us talk about more stuff. Just be able to give like a slice into our lives and then how we kind of deal with stuff on a day-to-day basis.
That's awesome. And I want to pause on what you said because consistent change. What many of us, I know on my end, I got very confused about what consistent change is. So let me define what I see it as, and I'd love to know if there's anything you want to chime in on it. It is not someone saying good things. It is not someone expressing a hope for the future. It is not somebody who says they're sorry you have bad feelings or that it hurt you. It is somebody that shows up and takes incremental steps to be different, consistently to be different. And when they fall down and fail, they immediately jump back to you, tell you that they fell down, tell you with a new plan going forward of how they're going to be different. You see a practical living out of a difference, not words, not action. It's a living out of a difference. And if you don't see that kind of consistent, and there's no blaming you, there's no attacking you, you're not too sensitive, you're not being cruel, you're not being impatient. If you're hearing any of those messages, this is not somebody who's authentically working at a deep level, and you're still at risk. They're still excusing themselves, and they haven't taken full accountability. That's what I didn't know, and that's what I got confused and put up with because I got too used to hearing lip service without action. But change requires action. So if you don't see it lived out, then I would not believe anything that I heard. Anything that I missed in it? Anything you want to add to that?
I think kind of like I love everything you said. Everything was amazing with that. I think the thing I would kind of maybe add in addition to it some way is I don't think you can have true change without vulnerability, because vulnerability like has that aspect of, this is where I actually am now. Where do I go from here? And vulnerability is, awful and difficult, for me to engage with and for narcissists to engage with because of that shame, all that kind of stuff. But I think like when we're talking about consistent change and seeing that, how I would kind of bring it, like pair it along with what you said, is consistent change is the growing and the deepening of vulnerability between two people. Because a lot of times people think that narcissists have vulnerability at the very beginning, and it's typically known as like fake vulnerability of, let me explain how I was abused, all my exes, let me explain like all this deep dark stuff that's like hard and frustrating that makes you have empathy, makes you have sympathy, but also makes you think, oh, I'm vulnerable, but I'm not vulnerable in the present. And so it's really key, like if someone's growing and changing, they have to be honest, past and present, and they have to be vulnerable. Past doesn't really, to me, vulnerability in the past is whatever, but vulnerability in the present is kind of like, to me, like honesty 2.0. Like it's the deep work of like I'm not just being honest that hey like this frustrated me. I'm being like honest of like saying like hey when you said that like this is what I felt and this is the experience that I'm going through or this is how I have to process it. Like whatever it might be, it's a whole nother level of honesty between a partner or between a friendship, whatever it is. That's not just I'm being honest, but I'm actually being vulnerable with my emotions and feelings to say like hey I can actually express who I am and not run away from that.
Right, right. Somebody just said, and I want to hop on it because it's such a good point. We're talking about vulnerability on the side of the narcissist who's been the one who's wounded their partner. We're not talking about vulnerability of the victim back with the narcissist. The victim from the get-go has been vulnerable for the most part. I'm not saying perfectly. We don't none of us do it perfectly, but we went into the relationship attempting to be our real self, attempting to make this a reciprocal relationship. And what happened is we got wounded and we shut down because of wounded. We're now staying more in a survival mode. So I see this as the victim now should stay in a protective mode until there's consistent demonstration of real change and real vulnerability and real reciprocity and real compassion from the narcissistic person. Until that happens, and I'm talking, somebody said, well, we did this for a few weeks or a few months and they revert back. To me, it's like, no, we're not talking in weeks or months. We need to talk about, we're talking years, guys, years of change for us to be able to completely reopen, regain trust, and move into that new space. And I know Kayla, I mean, I don't know her super well, but I at least met her. I would say she's careful. I mean, this is not a woman who is just wide open. And I do believe she could pack and leave if she needed to. Right. She has moved into the place of, I'm here because I choose to be. I know my risks and I'm willing to protect me if this gets dangerous again. I can see that off of her. That's a completely different space than what we're talking about, where we're moving in and like, oh, please love me. I need you. No, we're not talking about that kind of vulnerability.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah. So tell us what you're doing now, and then I'm going to talk about what I'm doing now, and then we'll kind of wrap it up. So what are you about what are you doing at this moment? What are things we should want people to know about?
As far as what? Sorry, like personal.
Just
growth,
like you got the podcast going,
okay,
you've got this book coming. I mean, tell us what you're doing.
No, absolutely. So like a quick spiel. So like we do have the podcast. Mentioned that just a minute ago. If you want to hear the wife's perspective, it's Trauma, Drama, and Life on Apple Podcast. Probably the newest thing that just came out this other week was our book, which is From Fantasy to Reality. So it's a journal with over 100 prompts to try to be able to help you go through the process of getting some clarity after the crazy making, after the confusion. I do meet with people on one-on-ones every day. So probably about it's about like 30 people a week that I'm engaging with and trying to help coach out of the trauma bond through the detox phase, and then to set up boundaries so that they don't revert back and they don't get with a toxic person down the road. And then I guess the two other things is we do have the NARC app that came out earlier this year, and we've had over 8,000 people that have downloaded it and engaged with it. So it's a really fantastic place for community and to try to be able to help people as they grow, heal, and change with different courses, accountability, ways to be able to kind of check in, throughout the week to keep them on track with their growth and healing. And then the last thing that we're in production actually is the Clarity Challenge. So we've got a 45-day Clarity Challenge that we're going to be rolling out. Hopefully November 1st is the plan. Right now we just finished, this past week, we just finished 30 videos out of 110 brand new videos that have never been seen before that are going to be involved in that challenge and in that on a day-to-day basis, trying to help guide people through their healing, their growth, and their change on a 45-day process to get clear and to have that clarity.
That's awesome. That's really awesome. Yes, I also have a podcast, Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse. We have new episodes every Monday and Thursday. I have a book, Love You More, The Harrowing Tale of Lies, Sex Addiction, and Double Cross, which tells the story of what happened to me in this narcissistic abusive relationship. I'm launching my course on cognitive dissonance called, thank you, Ben, called First Steps to Leaving a Narcissist. That's an online course with accompanying workbook that you can be able to buy independently. Also use standalone. That's coming out November 1st. And I'm trying to think of what else I got going. I've got several ideas going also in addition to this. So Vibely,
right?
Yes, I have a private premium community group for victims of narcissistic abuse. So if you want a safe place to come and process, I have 30% off if you use the QCOM code of HealNow23. It's everything. Oh, and I have a webinar, guys. A webinar coming up about how could I have fallen for a dangerous man. And that's going to be with Sandra Brown. So if you want to look at why victims are what makes us vulnerable to narcissistic and predatory people, she's going to hone in on the research. It's not that you're codependent. It's not that you're a people pleaser. It's actually that you have two super traits. She's going to talk about what these super traits are and how to be able to protect yourself better going forward in the future to reduce your risk in other relationships. So it's going to be super phenomenal with Sandra Brown. She wrote the book, Why Women Who Love Psychopaths and How to Spot a Dangerous Man. It's 2 of her books. So that's coming awesome. Up on November 10th. I'm super excited about that. So this is wonderful, Ben. Thank you so much for being here and letting us probe the mind of a narcissist. I appreciate it. It's been wonderful.
It's awesome. Well, thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, that webinar, guys, is November 10th. So if somebody just asked. And everything for both of us is a link in our bios, right? You have a link in your bio, and I know I have a link in my bio, so make sure you check it out. We're both on YouTube, too, with longer content, so you can find us. And I repost these over there, so you can see the long version of this permanently over on YouTube in a couple of days. It'll be there. So thank you so much, Ben. You rock. I appreciate it. And thanks guys, for hanging out with us today. I appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Take care.